Hi! On the woodpecker today? I'm making a bunch of bellows. The idea came to me to make a bellows when I realized that I was using a piece of cardboard to get my fire going at the cottage, while at home I have this not too good bellows, but it's still better than a piece of cardboard. The design of this bellows will be made with Aspire. This is quite new to me, so I'm going to try to explain what I did the best I can. The first thing I have to do is to enter the final dimension of the bellows, which is 8 by 16 inches. I also enter the thickness of my wood. The next part depends on your preferences. For myself, I mostly use the curve tool when I draw the left profile shape of my bellows. I'm leaving 4 inches for the handle and 2 for the top pointy part. Then I make a big curve between the two. Then I select all and make a mirror copy of my shape to finally join the two shapes by some straight lines. Next, I select every line and join all the vectors. But there are several parts to a bellows. To make this easier, the other parts will be drawn on different layers. So I add a new layer, copy my shape, and paste it on the new layer. Here, what I want to do is split the back in 2 different parts. I don't know if this is the best way, but it's how I made it. I begin by drawing a rectangle shape at the top of my shape to the size I want the fixed part of the back to be. Then I select both shapes and copy them. I add another layer and paste both shapes onto it. With that, I have 2 identical layers. On this layer, with both shapes selected, I use the tool which keeps the overlap of both selected shapes, and I end up with only the top of the bellows. Then I hide this layer, unhide the other, and with both shapes selected, I use the Trim Selected Object tool and trim what's inside both shapes. Then I end up with the bottom of the bellows and the rectangle. I erase the rectangle, and if I unhide the other layer, I have the shape of the whole bellows. But if I want to cut both shapes without any gap, I need to move the top. So I add 1/4 of an inch to the top of my working area. Select the top and move it. And now both parts are apart by 1/4 of an inch. But I'm not done yet. I add another layer for the air intake hole. Doing this is quite simple. I select the circle tool, move the cursor at the center, and draw a circle. The diameter is already at the right size. I also need some small holes at the bottom of the handles. I change the hole size and click where I want the hole to be. And now I'm ready to create the G-code file for my CNC machine. So after checking that the material thickness is the same as the wood thickness, I can select the bellows shape and open the profile selection. There, the first thing I do is change the cut depth to match the thickness of the wood. Next, I select the 1/8 end mill bit and check if all the speed values are good, because the speed must be set according to the material you cut. Then I make sure that I'm going to cut outside the shape. Next, I add small tabs around the shape to keep the shape in place after it's cut. 4 is enough. Since all the settings are to my liking, I can give a name to this cut path and press Calculate. And this is what the cut will look like. If I press Preview, it's even more obvious. But I'm not done. I also need to do all the same operations for the back of the bellows. After selecting both shapes, the rest is exactly the same as before. The only difference is that I put 4 tabs to each part of the back. And here's a preview of the final cut. But I'm still not done yet. I need to do the same for the holes. I begin by selecting the big hole, select the profile tool again, but this time I cut inside the shape and don't put any tabs. Just like for the two others, I add a name and here's the final result. I do the same thing for the small hole and I have everything to create the G-code files. And it's not difficult at all. I select the cut I want. For the top, I select the shape and the small hole and save this. Then I change my selection for the back and save the other file. But this is not the shape I started with. I made this shape and cut a pattern with it. I thought that using a reusable pattern would speed up the process. This was not totally true, but you'll see it later. But still, I make the first 4 bellows this way. So when my pattern is ready, I can cut some wood a bit longer than the length of my bellows. Then I put one side straight and rip what I can on the table saw. But it's not really enough. I finish the cut with my bandsaw. Then I can finish the surfacing. I'm using several tools to achieve the surface I want. Then I stick my pattern on one board. I also stick this on another board. With everything stuck together, I remove most of the wood with my small bandsaw. I finish the shape with a template bit. Then I can drill the air intake hole. After removing the pattern, I can cut the top of the back. A lot of unnecessary operations if I had used my CNC. Next, I glue the small piece in place and clamp it. When the glue is dry, I need to drill a hole so the air can get out. I'm using my slot mortiser to have a straight hole. But it's not deep enough. I finish the hole with the drill. And here it is. The air will get out now. I want this brass pipe in here. But since this is a water pipe, I need to remove some threads. So I cut one end. Next, I shine this a bit. I stick the two pieces together and round over all the edges. But because I've glued the small part, I'm unable to use the router for the inside of the front. That's the reason why, on my others, I round over the inside before gluing both pieces together. But I'm careful not to round over the places that will be glued. Before going any further, I have to figure the shape of the leather that will end up here. The first thing I do is trace a 40-degree angle on a piece of scrap and cut it. To help me stick this inside the bellows, I made sure the cut is nice and smooth. Then I can glue this between both pieces. But using double-sided tape would have been much simpler. All this so I can stick masking tape all around where the leather should be. When I'm done, I cut the excess tape. So all that's left is the letter's shape. I remove this with care and stick it on some paper. I do the same thing for the front leather part. And with those masking tape patterns, I was able to draw those patterns, which are available on my website. But before I can think of the letter, I need to take care of my woodpecker that I want to glue on the front over here. And for that, I'm going to use, for the first time, a piece of apple wood that I've cut several years ago. The first thing I have to do is surface it a bit. And rip it thinner. There's still a bit of work to do on this piece of wood. But even if the wood is ready, I need to go back to the computer and create my woodpecker. I begin by making my canvas the size I want my bird to be. Then I can create a component for a bitmap image. For that, I'm going to use the woodpecker I made in one of my past episodes. If you haven't seen it, I'm putting the link in the corner. So to create the component, it's as simple as importing it, scale it to the size I want, and I'm done. Here's a 3D representation of my woodpecker. But it's not thick enough. So I'm scaling the model to 3/8 of an inch thick. And now it's thicker. It's exactly what I want. But I still have more things to do. First of all, I need to find the bird's edge. To do so, I use the tool that traces a shape from a bitmap and select the least color possible. Now that I only see the silhouette of the bird, I click on Preview and I can see the bird's outline. I select the outside square frame and delete it because I don't need it. Next, I select the outline and the bird and clear the area outside the selection. Now I have a component without any square border. That's exactly what I need. But I'm not done yet. If I look at my model closely, it's exactly the shape I want, but maybe less square. To do so, I'm going to add some relief to the flat spots. This is quite simple. I use the Deposit tool and draw on the model. I select the brush size and set other parameters and add relief. One advice I can give is that it's much simpler to do this with a drawing tablet and a pencil. This is what I'm using from the beginning. And when I'm done with my relief, I want to ease the sharp edges. This is quite simple. I just have to go over the edges with the Smooth tool. This makes a great job. But I don't add any transition on the bottom of the bird's shoulder. Now I'm ready to save the G-code file. The first thing I do is select the Roughing Pass tool. But this doesn't start well because I get an error. Yes, after adding some relief on the shoulder, now my model is thicker than 3/8 of an inch. I need to recalculate the total height. And now I can go back to the roughing tool. I don't change anything on the material setup. For the roughing pass, I'm going to use a 1/4 inch end mill bit and check if the parameters are okay for hardwood. Since it's perfect, I don't change anything and press calculate. Now I can simulate the action. It's exactly what I was expecting. But I also need to make another thing with this bit, and it's cutting the bird's contour. So after selecting the shape, I go into the profile selection, change the cut depth, and select the 1/4 inch bit. I change the feed rate because 50 inches per minute is too fast for hardwood. I don't forget to select that I want to cut outside the vector. Then I add tabs. Now I can press calculate. And here's the result. It's perfect. Now I have to make all the same operations for the finish pass. But the final pass is done with a bit 4 times smaller. And like for the roughing pass, I check the feed rate. Since it's perfect, I can press calculate. And here's the result. Wow, this is perfect. But I'm not done yet. I also need to cut the contour with this small bit. And this is the final product. I save both passes as G-code files, and I can finally return inside the shop to cut the roughing pass. No, it's not that fast. In fact, this takes about 10 minutes. Now it's time to switch bit and check up this one. Yeah, it's quite fragile. That's the reason why I always buy them in boxes of 10. But when it's checked in place, I can cut the final pass. It's quite amazing to see this carving slowly appearing before your eyes. Slowly because, in fact, this takes about 50 minutes in reality. But even when it's done, it's not totally done. I need to cut the tabs. And sand the edges. But now I can glue the bird at the front of the bellows. I spread a thin layer of glue everywhere. Then I place the bird in place. I glue them 2 by 2 and add sandbags on top and even a bit more weight. When the glue is dry, I can glue the legs. Yes, the legs were a bit too fragile and 4 out of 5 broke. While the glue dries, I need to go back to the computer to make my logo and signature. This is quite simple. I begin by setting my work area to 4 by 1.6 inches with the center as the anchor point. Next, I import a bitmap image. In fact, it's my logo that I want to carve. I add some text and write the month, which I place on the design. I also use a centering tool to center the date. Then I reselect my logo and trace its contour. It's exactly the same operations I did for the bird. Now I have a vector of my logo. I select both vectors and use the V-Carve tool. Since all the settings are okay, I press calculate. And that's it. This is what will be carved. I just need to save this and carve the back of the bellows. Okay, just like for the 2 last times, this takes a bit more time than that, about 6 minutes. And in less than half an hour, I have the first 4 backs carved. Before I can apply the finish, I need to drill some holes on the handles. Finally, I can apply some finish. When the first coat is dry, I use sandpaper to sand the flat spots and scrub pads for the birds. Then I can spray the second coat. I do the same for the third coat. Now that the finish is dry, I can start to work on the leather. I begin by sticking together the pages from my pattern. After cutting them, I can get my leather. I bought this piece cheap, probably because of the huge hole in the middle. And now I just need to put my pattern on it, trace the shape, and cut it. When I have both pieces cut, I can begin. First, I staple a thicker piece of leather inside the bellows back to act as an air door. Then I can start nailing the leather. I fold the leather on itself and nail 4 to 5 nails on each side of the front, taking care to pull firmly on the leather. I don't want air getting out from the sides. When the front is done, I can start on the back. This is a bit more difficult to nail because it's quite difficult to hold it in place while nailing it. Sometimes I can put it into the vise. Other times, I have to hold it on the workbench. But in the end, the important thing is to nail it. When it's time to nail the front part, this is even harder than the back. But with a bit of patience, a vise, and nails, it can be done. On the flat part, I nail 3 nails. but I have to trim them a little because they're longer than the wood's thickness. Next, I screw the brass nozzle, and I have a working bellows. Okay, besides the wind noise in the microphone, this is not that obvious. So, I'm going to make a small visual demonstration. And it's here that I notice a small problem. All my woodpeckers are glued upside down. So it's only now that I decide to make the fifth one. But this time around, all the profiles are cut with my CNC. And again, this takes more time than this. But it's not that bad, because each side takes about 6 minutes. I don't think that I'm saving that much time using the bandsaw, the router, and the table saw. But I still need to round over the edges. But all the other steps are exactly the same, beside, obviously, gluing the bird the right way. The very last thing to do is to cut lengths of strap leather and tie them to the ends of the handles. This is not that difficult. And here are the 5 bellows I made. I'm very satisfied. I like them. Okay, even if 4 of them have an upside down bird on them. I'm not sure which handle type I like the most. But if you want to make your own, I have both of them in my plan section on my website. But one advice I can give you is don't use fake leather. I did it for my first one. It's working fine, but it's not too flexible. But I love my carvings. It's exactly what I wanted. This adds something special to my bellows. But the most important thing is that I have something that works way better than my old one. I hope I didn't bore you too much with those bellows, and we'll see each other pretty soon for another episode of The Woodpecker.